Marcus Chen stepped off the transport ship onto Earth's surface, his military boots making contact with home soil for the first time in 8 years. The war against the Zephyrian Empire had finally ended, and humanity had emerged victorious against all odds. At 26, Marcus had seen more death and destruction than most beings would witness in 10 lifetimes. His body bore the scars of plasma burns, his mind carried the weight of commanding entire fleets, and his soul held the memories of planets turned to glass. The homecoming ceremony was grand. Thousands of people lined the streets of New Geneva, cheering for the returning heroes. Marcus wore his dress uniform, decorated with medals that told the story of humanity's greatest military campaign. The Cross of Terra hung heavy around his neck, awarded for single-handedly destroying a Zephyrian dreadnought while protecting a civilian evacuation fleet. His rank insignia showed 4 stars, making him one of the youngest fleet admirals in human history. But as the crowds cheered and confetti fell like artificial snow, Marcus felt hollow inside. The war had taken everything from him. His parents had died in the initial Zephyrian assault on Luna Colony. His younger sister Emma had been killed during the siege of Mars. Most of his friends from the academy were buried on distant worlds whose names he could barely pronounce. Victory felt like ashes in his mouth. The transition back to civilian life proved more challenging than any battle he had fought. The government had promised full integration programs for returning veterans, but Marcus discovered a cruel irony in their plan for him. Due to his young age when he enlisted and the time dilation effects of faster-than-light travel, he was technically still within the mandatory education age bracket according to Earth's revised educational laws. "You're telling me I have to go back to school?" Marcus stared at the bureaucrat across the metal desk, hardly believing the words coming from the woman's mouth. Sarah Wellington, Director of Veteran Affairs, nodded sympathetically but remained firm. "The Universal Education Act of 2387 is very clear, Admiral Chen. Any citizen under the age of 28 who hasn't completed their basic education requirements must attend school. Your military service, while commendable, doesn't fulfill the civilian education standards. I commanded a fleet of 300 ships. I've studied alien technologies that your scientists are still trying to understand. I've negotiated peace treaties with species that speak in mathematical equations." Marcus's voice remained level, but his hands clenched into fists. "And you want me to sit in a classroom learning about photosynthesis? I understand your frustration, but the law is the law. However, we've arranged for you to attend Pinnacle Academy, one of our most prestigious institutions. They have special programs for exceptional cases like yours." Marcus laughed bitterly. Exceptional cases. Is that what we're calling war veterans now? 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing outside Pinnacle Academy, a sprawling complex of gleaming towers and floating platforms that housed the children of Earth's elite. His military duffel bag felt strange in his hands after years of carrying plasma rifles and tactical equipment. The other students streaming through the gates wore expensive clothes and carried the latest holographic tablets. They chattered about parties, sports teams, and social media drama. None of them had ever seen a friend die in their arms. None of them had made decisions that determined whether entire colonies lived or died. None of them understood what it meant to shoulder the weight of humanity's survival. The headmaster, Dr. Victoria Ashford, greeted him in her office with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her manner suggested she was used to being the most important person in any room. "Admiral Chen, what an honor to have such a distinguished war hero at our academy," she said, though her tone suggested she viewed his presence as more of an inconvenience than an honor. "I trust you understand that here at Pinnacle, we maintain very high standards. Military service, while admirable, doesn't prepare one for the rigorous academic challenges our students face." Marcus studied her carefully. He had learned to read people during the war, to spot deception and hidden agendas. Dr. Ashford reminded him of certain politicians he had dealt with, the kind who smiled while planning to stab you in the back. "I'm sure I'll manage," he replied simply. "Of course. Now we've arranged a special schedule for you. You'll be taking accelerated courses to catch up on what you've missed during your time away. Mathematics, literature, social studies, and of course, our mandatory social integration classes." Social integration? Yes, we find that students who have been isolated from normal social development often need extra help learning to interact appropriately with their peers. Given your extended absence from civilian life, we thought it best to include these sessions. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus had negotiated with alien diplomats who showed more respect for humanity than this woman was showing for his service. But he simply nodded and accepted his class schedule. His first day of actual classes proved to be everything he had feared, and worse. His homeroom teacher, Ms. Patricia Novak, introduced him to the class with barely concealed disdain. "Class, we have a new student joining us today. This is Marcus Chen, who has been away from proper education for several years due to military service. I trust you'll all help him catch up on what he's missed." The other students stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Most of them were 18 or 19 years old, making Marcus feel ancient despite being only slightly older. They whispered among themselves, and he caught fragments of their conversations. "Military service? Isn't that what poor kids do when they can't get into good schools? My dad says the war was mostly propaganda anyway. The aliens probably weren't even that dangerous. Look at those scars on his hands. So gross." Marcus took his assigned seat in the back of the classroom and tried to focus on the lesson. Ms. Novak was teaching basic calculus, mathematics that Marcus had mastered before he turned 16. He had used more advanced calculations to plot hyperspace jump coordinates and calculate orbital bombardment trajectories. But when he tried to participate in the discussion, offering a more elegant solution to the problem on the board, Ms. Novak cut him off sharply. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're following a specific curriculum here. Please wait your turn and raise your hand next time." The humiliation burned worse than plasma fire. He was being treated like a child, lectured about raising his hand to speak. During the war, admirals and generals had hung on his every word. Alien species had negotiated with him as an equal. Now he was being scolded for speaking out of turn in a math class that covered material beneath his notice. Lunch proved even worse. The cafeteria was divided into strict social hierarchies that the students navigated with practiced ease. Marcus took his tray and looked for an empty seat, but every table seemed to have invisible barriers around it. The wealthy kids sat together, discussing their parents' business dealings and weekend plans to visit other planets for fun. The athletes occupied their own section, their conversation revolving around games and competitions that seemed trivial after real combat. The academic achievers huddled over their tablets, comparing grades and discussing college applications. Marcus finally found an empty table in the corner and sat alone. He ate his synthetic protein meal in silence, remembering field rations shared with Marines before dangerous missions. The food here was technically better, but it tasted like nothing compared to those moments of camaraderie before battle. A group of students from his morning class approached his table. Their leader was a boy named Derek Ashford, and the family name suggested he was related to the headmaster. He had the kind of soft features that spoke of a life without hardship, and his expensive clothes marked him as one of the academy's elite. "Hey, war hero," Derek said with a smirk. "We were wondering something. If you're such a big military genius, how come you're stuck in school with a bunch of kids? Didn't they teach you anything useful out there?" Marcus looked up at Derek and his followers. He could kill all of them with his bare hands in less than 10 seconds. He had strangled Zephyrian shock troopers with his bare hands, beings twice his size with natural armor and poison claws. But these weren't enemies to be eliminated. They were just children playing games they didn't understand. The government requires all citizens to complete their education, Marcus said quietly. Right, but come on, Derek pressed on, encouraged by his friend's laughter. You must have some cool war stories. Did you ever actually kill anyone, or were you just like a desk jockey pushing papers around? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind. The Zephyrian commander he had shot point-blank during the boarding action on Station Omega-7. The enemy soldiers who had died when he ordered the destruction of their command ship. The thousands of beings who had perished because of his strategic decisions. Each death was burned into his memory, carrying the weight of a life ended by his choices. I don't talk about the war, he said finally. Derek laughed. See? I knew he was just some wannabe tough guy. Probably spent the whole war hiding behind a desk somewhere safe while real soldiers did the fighting. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. These children had no idea what real soldiers had sacrificed for them. They lived in their safe bubble of privilege, protected by the blood of people they would never meet or acknowledge. The urge to show them exactly what he was capable of rose in his throat like bile. Instead, he stood up slowly and walked away. Behind him, Derek's group erupted in laughter and congratulatory comments about putting the fake war hero in his place. The afternoon brought more of the same. In literature class, they were studying ancient Earth poetry, works that seemed quaint and naive after witnessing the poetry that Zephyrian prisoners had carved into their cell walls with their own claws. The teacher, Mr. Harrison, called on Marcus to interpret a sonnet about love and loss. Mr. Chen, can you tell us what you think Shakespeare meant when he wrote about the wages of war? Marcus stared at the words on the page. Shakespeare had never seen a planet die. He had never watched cities burn from orbit, or held a dying soldier while they whispered their last words. His poetry was beautiful, but it was the beauty of someone who had never truly experienced the thing he was writing about. I think he was writing from imagination, Marcus said carefully. He never experienced real war. The class laughed at what they assumed was ignorance. Mr. Harrison frowned disapprovingly. Mr. Chen, Shakespeare lived through very turbulent times. His understanding of conflict was quite sophisticated for his era. Perhaps you should spend more time studying before making such sweeping judgments about classical literature. Again, Marcus was treated like an ignorant child. His analysis, informed by actual experience of war's true cost, was dismissed in favor of academic theories developed by people who had never left Earth's atmosphere. The day finally ended, but Marcus's relief was short-lived. As he walked toward the exit, he found Derek and his gang waiting for him in the corridor. This time, Derek's expression was more serious, less playful. "Hey, soldier boy," Derek called out. "We need to have a little talk." Marcus paused, recognizing the setup. In the military, this would be the moment when enemy forces revealed their true intentions. He had walked into similar situations on hostile worlds, always ready for violence to erupt without warning. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "See, the thing is," Derek said, stepping closer with his friends flanking him, "this is our school. We've got a certain way of doing things here, and we don't really appreciate outsiders coming in and disrupting the natural order." Marcus almost laughed. Natural order. These children thought their playground politics represented some kind of natural law. They had no concept of real hierarchy, the kind forged in combat where leadership meant the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. "I'm not disrupting anything," Marcus said. "I'm just trying to get through my classes." "Right. But see, that's the problem," Derek continued. "You walking around here with your scars and your tough guy act makes the rest of us look bad. Parents start asking why their kids aren't as heroic as the war veteran. Teachers start making comparisons. It's bad for everyone. Marcus finally understood. This wasn't random bullying. This was political maneuvering, probably orchestrated by someone higher up the food chain. Derek was just the weapon, but someone else was directing the attack. "So here's what's going to happen," Derek said, his voice taking on a threatening tone that would have been laughable if Marcus weren't so tired. "You're going to keep your head down, stop showing off in class, and maybe find somewhere else to eat lunch. In return, we'll make sure your time here goes smoothly. Refuse, and we'll make your life very difficult." Marcus looked at Derek and his friends. They were soft, pampered children who had never faced real adversity. They thought intimidation meant raised voices and implied threats. They had no idea they were threatening someone who had stared down alien warlords and negotiated with species that communicated through violence. But that was exactly the problem. Marcus could end this confrontation in seconds, but doing so would only prove their point about him being dangerous and disruptive. He was trapped by his own capability, forced to endure their amateur intimidation because responding appropriately would destroy the very thing he was trying to protect. "I'll keep that in mind," he said finally. Derek smiled, mistaking restraint for submission. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." As Marcus walked away, he realized that his real war was just beginning. The Zephyrian Empire had been a straightforward enemy, one he could fight with weapons and tactics. But this new battlefield was far more complex, governed by rules he didn't fully understand, and populated by people who saw his greatest achievements as threats to their comfortable worldview. He stepped outside into the afternoon sun and looked back at the Academy's gleaming towers. Somewhere in those halls, the real enemy was planning their next move. Marcus had faced down alien armadas and emerged victorious, but he had a feeling that surviving high school might prove to be his greatest challenge yet. Marcus's second week at Pinnacle Academy brought new challenges that made his first days seem like a gentle introduction. The pattern of harassment had become more sophisticated, moving beyond Derek's crude intimidation tactics to something more insidious and systematic. It started with small things. His locker combination was mysteriously changed, forcing him to wait in line at the administration office while other students snickered. His homework assignments disappeared from his bag, leading to lectures from teachers about responsibility and making excuses. During group projects, he found himself mysteriously excluded from teams, forced to work alone while his classmates whispered about his antisocial behavior. The social isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect. Marcus had spent years surrounded by military personnel who understood sacrifice and duty. Now he was trapped among teenagers whose biggest concerns involved social media followers and weekend parties. They spoke a language of privilege and entitlement that felt foreign after years of military discipline. During his third week, Marcus discovered the true architect of his persecution. He was sitting alone in the library during lunch, trying to complete a redundant assignment about Earth's colonial expansion, when he overheard a conversation between two teachers in the adjacent study room. "The Ashford situation is getting out of hand," said Ms. Novak, her voice carrying clearly through the thin partition. "The boy is clearly disturbed. Did you see how he corrected my calculus lesson yesterday? No normal student would have that kind of mathematical knowledge." "Victoria is handling it appropriately," replied Mr. Harrison. "We can't have someone with his psychological profile disrupting the learning environment. These military types come back damaged, and it's our responsibility to protect the other students." "But what if the parents find out we're essentially forcing out a war veteran? The publicity could be disastrous." "That's exactly why we're being subtle about it. If he leaves voluntarily due to social pressures, we're not responsible for his departure. Victoria has connections with the education board. They'll find another placement for him, somewhere more suited to his needs." Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest. He was being systematically driven out by the very people who were supposed to be educating him. The headmaster was orchestrating his persecution, using her own son as the primary weapon. all while maintaining plausible deniability. The next day brought the worst confrontation yet. Marcus was in the Academy's workshop, completing a mandatory engineering project. The assignment was to build a simple hover mechanism, technology that he had modified and improved during countless military operations. While other students struggled with basic principles, Marcus had constructed a device that exceeded the project requirements by several orders of magnitude. Professor Williams, the engineering instructor, examined Marcus's work with barely concealed suspicion. "This is far beyond what I expected from a first-year student," he said. "Are you certain you didn't receive outside help?" Marcus looked at the man steadily. "I designed it myself, sir. The mathematical calculations alone should have taken you weeks to complete. The fabrication techniques you've employed aren't even covered in our curriculum." Professor Williams's voice grew colder. "I'm going to have to ask you to rebuild this project using only the materials and methods we've discussed in class." Other students gathered around to watch the confrontation. Marcus could see Derek smirking in the background, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he was being penalized for competence, punished for knowing too much. "With respect, Professor, I've used only the materials provided. The techniques I employed are standard optimization protocols." Marcus kept his voice level, but inside he was screaming. During the war, innovation had been rewarded. Soldiers who could improve their equipment or develop new tactics were celebrated and promoted. Here, excellence was treated as cheating. "Mr. Chen, I've been teaching for 15 years. I know what students at your level are capable of producing." Professor Williams picked up Marcus's device and placed it in the recycling unit. "You'll start over, and this time you'll follow the instructions exactly as written." The casual destruction of his work felt like a slap in the face. Marcus had put genuine effort into the project, applying hard-won knowledge to create something beautiful and functional. Watching it destroyed for no reason other than spite triggered memories of watching Zephyrian forces destroy human colonies just to make a point. That afternoon, Marcus found himself called to Dr. Ashford's office for what she termed a wellness check. The headmaster sat behind her massive desk, her expression a mask of false concern. "Marcus, I've been hearing disturbing reports about your behavior in class. Several teachers have expressed concern about your psychological state." Marcus remained standing, his military bearing automatic, despite the civilian setting. "I've followed all Academy rules, ma'am." "Please sit down." Dr. Ashford gestured to a chair positioned lower than her own, a subtle power play that Marcus recognized immediately. "I want to help you succeed here, but I'm concerned that your military experiences may have left you ill-equipped for a normal academic environment." "I'm performing at the top of every class academically," Marcus replied, taking the offered seat but maintaining his composure. "Academic performance isn't everything, Marcus. Social integration is equally important. Your teachers report that you seem isolated, aggressive, and unwilling to collaborate with other students." Marcus almost laughed at the distortion of reality. He wasn't isolated by choice, but by systematic exclusion. He wasn't aggressive, but rather restrained beyond what should be humanly possible. And collaboration was impossible when other students had been instructed to avoid him. "Perhaps," Dr. Ashford continued, "you would be more comfortable in a specialized program designed for veterans. I have contacts at several institutions that cater specifically to individuals with your background." The offer was delivered with a smile, but Marcus heard the threat underneath. "Leave voluntarily, or we'll make your life even more miserable." "I prefer to complete my education here," Marcus said quietly. Dr. Ashford's smile faltered slightly. "Of course, that's your choice. But I want you to understand that Pinnacle Academy has very high standards, both academically and socially. Not every student is suited for our environment." That evening, Marcus walked through the Academy's dormitory halls, heading to his small single room. Unlike other students who lived in shared suites with common areas and social spaces, Marcus had been assigned isolated accommodations for his own comfort. The loneliness was crushing after years of military camaraderie. As he passed the common room, he could hear other students laughing and talking. Through the doorway, he saw them gathered around holographic displays, playing games and sharing stories. For a moment, he considered joining them, trying once more to bridge the gap between his experiences and theirs. Then he heard Derek's voice rising above the others. So there I was, telling this war veteran tough guy exactly how things work around here. You should have seen his face when I laid down the law. These military types are all the same. They act tough until someone stands up to them. The other students laughed appreciatively, and Marcus heard embellished versions of their confrontation being shared as entertainment. In Derek's version, Marcus had practically begged for mercy, promising to stay out of Derek's way in exchange for peace. Marcus continued to his room without stopping. He sat on his narrow bed and stared at the wall where he had hung a single photograph from his military service. It showed his unit after the Battle of Kepler Station, grimy and exhausted but alive. Most of the people in that photo were dead now, killed in subsequent battles or lost to the psychological toll of war. They had died believing they were protecting Earth and humanity's future. They had sacrificed everything to ensure that children like Derek could live in safety and comfort. And those same children now viewed their sacrifice as either irrelevant or threatening. The next morning brought a new low point. Marcus arrived at his first class to discover that his assigned seat had been moved to a desk positioned separately from the other students, ostensibly because his presence was distracting to other learners. The isolation was so obvious that even the most oblivious students noticed. During the lunch period, Marcus decided to eat outside rather than endure another session of cafeteria politics. He found a quiet spot in the academy's garden area and opened his meal, trying to enjoy a few minutes of peace. His solitude was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Martinez, one of the few students who hadn't actively participated in his ostracization. She was a quiet girl who usually kept to herself, focused on her studies rather than social dynamics. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. Marcus nodded, surprised by the first friendly gesture he had received since arriving at the academy. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Sarah spoke again. "I know what they're doing to you isn't fair," she said quietly. "My older brother served in the war, too. He didn't make it back." The simple acknowledgement of his service and sacrifice felt like a revelation after weeks of dismissal and hostility. Marcus looked at Sarah with new respect, recognizing the quiet strength that came from personal loss. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, meaning it completely. "He would have been proud to serve under someone like you," Sarah continued. "I looked up your service record. What you accomplished out there was incredible." Marcus felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. He wasn't used to praise for his military achievements, especially from civilians who understood their true cost. "I just did my job," he replied. "No, you did a lot more than that." Sarah's voice carried a quiet intensity. "My brother's letters talked about commanders who truly cared about their people, who made the hard choices so their soldiers could come home. You were one of the good ones." For the first time since arriving at Pinnacle Academy, Marcus felt a connection to another person. Sarah understood sacrifice in a way that most of the Academy's students never would. Her brother's death had taught her the true cost of the freedom that others took for granted. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Derek and his usual entourage. The group approached with the confident swagger of predators who had scented weakness. "Well, well," Derek said with mock surprise. "Looks like our resident war hero has found a friend. Sarah, I didn't think you were into charity cases." Sarah's expression hardened, but she didn't back down. "Leave us alone, Derek." "Oh, I'm not causing any trouble. Just checking on our new student's social development. Derek's smile was cold and calculating. Though I have to say, Sarah, hanging out with damaged goods probably isn't good for your reputation. Marcus felt the familiar cold rage rising in his chest. He could tolerate attacks on himself, but hearing Sarah insulted for showing him basic human decency triggered something deeper. His hands began to clench into fists, and he found himself calculating the precise movements needed to neutralize Derek and his friends. Then Sarah's hand touched his arm gently, the contact grounding him and pulling him back from the edge of violence. "It's not worth it," she said quietly, her voice carrying an understanding of exactly what he was contemplating. Derek, oblivious to how close he had come to serious injury, continued his performance for his friends. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Look at how tense he gets. This guy is clearly unstable. One day he's going to snap and hurt someone." The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Marcus was walking a razor's edge between restraint and explosion. The constant pressure, the systematic humiliation, and the casual dismissal of everything he had sacrificed were pushing him toward a breaking point that would prove Derek's propaganda correct. Sarah stood up slowly, her movement forcing Derek to step back. "My brother died fighting for people like you," she said, her voice carrying a quiet fury that made Derek's bluster seem pathetic by comparison. He believed he was protecting something worth saving. Looking at you, I wonder if he was wrong. The simple statement cut through Derek's confidence like a plasma blade through armor. For the first time since Marcus had met him, Derek looked uncertain. Faced with someone who questioned the very foundation of his privileged existence. "Come on," Derek said to his friends, his voice lacking its usual arrogance. "Let's leave the freaks alone." As the group departed, Marcus looked at Sarah with new appreciation. She had defended him not through violence or threats, but through moral authority that Derek couldn't challenge or dismiss. "Thank you," he said quietly. "My brother would have done the same thing," she replied. "He believed that the people worth fighting for were the ones who stood up for others, even when it cost them something." That evening, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Professor Elena Vasquez, the Academy's xenobiology instructor, knocked on his door with a purpose that seemed different from the hostility he had grown accustomed to. "Admiral Chen, do you have a few minutes? I'd like to discuss something with you." Marcus invited her in, curious about what this meeting might bring. Professor Vasquez was one of the few faculty members who hadn't actively participated in his marginalization, though she hadn't defended him either. "I've been reviewing your file," she said without preamble. "Your experience with alien species during the war is remarkable. I understand you negotiated first contact protocols with several previously unknown civilizations." Marcus nodded cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I'm conducting research on Zephyrian biotechnology, trying to understand their organic computing systems. Your field reports contain observations that could be invaluable to my work." Professor Vasquez paused, studying his expression carefully. "I'd like to propose an independent study program that would allow you to contribute to cutting-edge research while fulfilling your academic requirements." The offer was unexpected and potentially life-changing. Instead of enduring basic classes designed for teenagers, Marcus could apply his knowledge to meaningful work that might benefit humanity's understanding of alien technology. "What's the catch?" he asked. Professor Vasquez smiled grimly. "The catch is that it would require Dr. Ashford's approval, and I suspect she has other plans for your academic career." Marcus understood the implication. The headmaster wanted him gone, not successful. Any program that might allow him to thrive at Pinnacle Academy would be viewed as a threat to her agenda. "Why are you offering this?" Marcus asked. "Because wasting your knowledge and experience is a crime against scientific progress," Professor Vasquez replied. I don't care about academy politics or social integration programs. I care about advancing human understanding of the universe, and you possess insights that can't be found in any textbook." For the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus felt hope. Perhaps there was a path forward that didn't involve either submission or explosion. Perhaps he could find a way to honor his service while building a future worth having. But as he looked out his window at the academy's gleaming towers, Marcus knew that Dr. Ashford and her allies wouldn't give up easily. The real battle for his future was just beginning. The confrontation that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning during Marcus's 4th week at Pinnacle Academy. He had spent the previous evening working with Professor Vasquez on her research proposal, documenting his observations of Zephyrian biotechnology in academic format. For the first time since his arrival, he felt like his knowledge and experience were being valued rather than dismissed. That optimism was shattered when he arrived at Dr. Ashford's office for what she had called a routine academic review. The headmaster wasn't alone. Seated across from her desk were 2 men in expensive suits, whom Marcus recognized as government bureaucrats, their bearing and attitudes marking them as the type of officials who made careers out of managing problems rather than solving them. "Admiral Chen, please sit down," Dr. Ashford said, her tone carrying a formality that suggested this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Richard Hawthorne from the Ministry of Education and Mr. James Crawford from Veteran Affairs." Marcus took the offered seat, but remained alert. He had attended enough military briefings to recognize when he was being set up for something unpleasant. The 2 officials studied him with the clinical detachment of people examining a specimen rather than meeting a fellow human being. Dr. Hawthorne spoke first, his voice carrying the bureaucratic smoothness that Marcus had learned to distrust. "Admiral, we've been reviewing your integration into civilian academic life, and frankly, we have concerns about your adjustment to the educational environment." "My academic performance has exceeded all requirements," Marcus replied carefully. "Academic performance is only one aspect of successful integration," Mr. Crawford interjected. "We've received reports of antisocial behavior, difficulty collaborating with peers, and an unwillingness to accept guidance from educational professionals." Marcus felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest. These men were sitting in judgment of his character based on reports from people who had systematically excluded and humiliated him. The irony of being labeled antisocial by his tormentors would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so serious. "I've followed every academy rule and regulation," he said quietly. Dr. Ashford leaned forward, her expression a mask of false concern. "Marcus, no one is questioning your intentions, but we have to consider what's best for all students, including yourself. The social dynamics here clearly aren't working for you." Dr. Hawthorne opened a tablet and began reading from what was obviously a prepared statement. "We've identified an alternative educational program that would be much better suited to your unique circumstances. The Meridian Institute specializes in education for individuals with psychological trauma and social integration difficulties." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. They were labeling him as psychologically damaged and socially defective, using his military service as evidence of mental instability rather than heroic achievement. The Meridian Institute was essentially a reform school for problem cases, a place where inconvenient veterans could be hidden away from the privileged children of Earth's elite. "I prefer to complete my education here," Marcus said, his voice carrying the steel that had once commanded fleets. Mr. Crawford's expression hardened. "Admiral, with respect, this isn't really a request. Your continued presence here has become disruptive to the educational environment. Multiple faculty members have expressed concerns about your impact on other students." Marcus looked at each of them in turn, recognizing the coordinated attack for what it was. They had manufactured a crisis to justify his removal, using his own competence and knowledge as evidence against him. The same qualities that had made him a successful military commander were being twisted into symptoms of psychological damage. "And if I refuse?" he asked. Dr. Ashford's smile became predatory. "Then we would be forced to document your refusal to accept appropriate educational placement in your permanent record. Future institutions might view such inflexibility as evidence of deeper psychological issues." The threat was clear: submit to exile at their reform school, or be branded as mentally unstable in permanent government records. Either choice would effectively end any hope of a normal civilian life. Marcus stood up slowly, his movement causing all three officials to tense slightly. They were suddenly aware that they were threatening someone who had spent years in mortal combat, someone whose very presence suggested controlled violence. "I need time to consider your offer," he said carefully. Dr. Hawthorne consulted his tablet. "You have until Friday to make your decision. The Meridian Institute has an opening in their next intake class." As Marcus left the office, he realized that the real war for his future was entering its final phase. He had faced down alien armadas and emerged victorious, but this enemy fought with paperwork and bureaucracy rather than plasma weapons and kinetic bombardment. That afternoon, he sought out Professor Vasquez in her laboratory. The xenobiology researcher was examining tissue samples from a Zephyrian specimen, her work representing the kind of meaningful contribution Marcus had hoped to make during his academic career. "They're trying to force me out," he told her without preamble. Professor Vasquez looked up from her microscope, her expression immediately serious. "The Meridian Institute?" Marcus nodded. "You knew this was coming?" "I suspected it might. Dr. Ashford has been building a case against you since the day you arrived. She views your presence here as a threat to the Academy's reputation and her own authority. Can you do anything to help?" Professor Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. "I have some influence with the academic board, but challenging Dr. Ashford directly would be career suicide. She has too many powerful allies." Marcus felt the last of his hope crumbling. Even the one person who had shown faith in his potential was constrained by Academy politics. He was truly alone in this fight. That evening, Marcus found himself walking through the Academy's gardens, trying to process the impossible situation he faced. The artificial ecosystem was beautiful in its perfection, carefully designed to provide a peaceful environment for studying and reflection. But like everything else at Pinnacle Academy, it felt hollow and manufactured compared to the raw reality he had experienced during the war. He was surprised to find Sarah sitting on a bench near the central fountain, her tablet displaying what looked like homework assignments. She looked up as he approached, her expression immediately concerned. "You look like someone just declared war on you," she said. Marcus sat down beside her, grateful for the company of someone who understood loss and sacrifice. "They're forcing me to transfer to a special school for problem veterans." Sarah's expression hardened. "The Meridian Institute? You know about it?" "My cousin was sent there after he came back from the war. It's basically a prison disguised as a school. They keep veterans isolated from normal society under the pretext of helping them readjust." Sarah's voice carried a bitterness that spoke of personal experience with the system's failures. Marcus stared at the fountain, watching the artificial water cycle through its predetermined patterns. "I don't know how to fight this. In the military, enemies were clearly defined and victory conditions were objective. Here, I'm fighting shadows and bureaucracy." "Maybe you're approaching this wrong," Sarah said thoughtfully. "You're trying to fight their system using their rules, but you have advantages they can't counter if you're willing to use them." Marcus looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "You're a legitimate war hero with a service record that makes their academic achievements look trivial. You have knowledge and experience that can't be dismissed or discredited, and most importantly, you have allies they don't know about." "Allies?" Sarah smiled grimly. "There are more people here who respect what you've done than you realize. They've just been afraid to speak up because the social cost seemed too high. But if you give them a reason to stand with you, they might surprise you. That night, Marcus made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. Instead of accepting defeat or lashing out in anger, he chose to fight back, using the very qualities that had made him a successful military commander: strategic thinking, tactical planning, and the ability to inspire others to follow him into impossible situations. He began by reaching out to other students who had shown signs of dissatisfaction with the Academy's social hierarchy. These weren't the elite children who benefited from the current system, but scholarship students, academic achievers, and others who felt marginalized by Pinnacle's culture of privilege and entitlement. Marcus discovered that many students were privately disgusted by Derek's behavior and the faculty's obvious favoritism. They had remained silent not out of approval, but out of fear of becoming targets themselves. The Academy's culture of intimidation and exclusion had created a climate where speaking up required genuine courage. His first ally was Jake Morrison, a brilliant engineering student whose working-class background made him an outsider despite his academic excellence. Jake had watched the systematic destruction of Marcus's workshop project with outrage, but had been afraid to intervene. "What they did to you was wrong," Jake said during their private conversation in the library. "You're 10 times smarter than anyone in that class, and they punished you for it." Marcus found similar sentiments among other marginalized students. There was Lisa Park, a scholarship recipient whose parents had died in the war. There was Ahmed Hassan, whose unconventional thinking made him a target for teachers who preferred conformity. And there were others, each carrying their own grievances against a system that rewarded mediocrity and punished excellence. But Marcus knew that student support alone wouldn't be enough to defeat Dr. Ashford's bureaucratic alliance. He needed evidence of wrongdoing and allies with real power within the system. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Professor Vasquez approached him 2 days before his deadline with information that could change everything. "I've been doing some research of my own," she said, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Dr. Ashford's campaign against you isn't just personal prejudice. She's been systematically excluding veterans from Pinnacle Academy to maintain her institution's elite image." Professor Vasquez showed Marcus documentation of other veterans who had been forced out through similar tactics. Each case followed the same pattern: manufactured social problems, faculty complaints about disruption, and ultimately forced transfers to less prestigious institutions. "More importantly," Professor Vasquez continued, "she's been violating federal guidelines for veteran education. The Universal Education Act specifically prohibits discrimination based on military service, and what she's doing clearly qualifies as systematic discrimination." Marcus studied the evidence with the analytical mind that had once evaluated alien military capabilities. The pattern was clear and damning, but exposing it would require careful execution to avoid giving Dr. Ashford time to cover her tracks. "There's something else," Professor Vasquez said. "I've been in contact with Admiral Sarah Chen from Fleet Command. She's your cousin, I believe?" Marcus felt a surge of surprise. Admiral Sarah Chen was indeed his cousin, a brilliant strategist who had commanded the defense of the Sol system during the war's final phases. He hadn't spoken to her since his return to Earth, focusing on his civilian transition rather than maintaining military connections. "Admiral Chen has been following your situation with interest," Professor Vasquez continued. "She's prepared to testify about your character and competence if this matter goes to a formal hearing." For the first time since arriving at Pinnacle Academy, Marcus felt like he had the weapons needed to fight back effectively. But victory would require more than evidence and testimony. It would require the kind of coordinated campaign that he had once used to defeat alien armadas. Thursday evening, the night before his deadline, Marcus called a meeting of his student allies in an unused classroom. The group was smaller than he would have liked, but represented a cross-section of the Academy's most capable and principled students. "Tomorrow they expect me to surrender and accept exile," he told them. "Instead, I'm going to give them a war they're not prepared to fight." He outlined his plan with the precision of a military briefing. Each student had a specific role to play, from documenting incidents to gathering testimony from other marginalized students. The goal wasn't just to defend Marcus, but to expose the entire system of discrimination and exclusion that had made his persecution possible. Sarah would coordinate with her network of scholarship students to document other cases of bias and favoritism. Jake would use his technical skills to preserve electronic evidence before it could be deleted. Ahmed would reach out to his contacts among the faculty to identify potential allies within the system. "This isn't just about me," Marcus emphasized. "This is about whether Pinnacle Academy will be allowed to continue discriminating against anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." The next morning, Marcus walked into Dr. Ashford's office with the confidence of a man who had faced down impossible odds and emerged victorious. The same three officials were present, their expressions suggesting they expected a routine capitulation. "Admiral Chen," Dr. Ashford began, "I trust you've made your decision about the transfer to Meridian Institute." Marcus placed a thick folder on her desk, the documentation making a satisfying impact against the polished surface. "I've made my decision. I'm filing a formal complaint with the Ministry of Education alleging systematic discrimination against military veterans." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Hawthorne reached for the folder with hands that weren't quite steady, his bureaucratic composure cracking as he recognized the thorough documentation of their discriminatory practices. Dr. Ashford's mask of false concern slipped completely, revealing the calculating politician underneath. "Admiral, I think you're making a serious mistake. Accusations like these could damage your credibility and future prospects." Marcus smiled with the cold precision of someone who had once stared down alien warlords. "Dr. Ashford, I've spent 8 years fighting for humanity's survival. Do you really think I'm afraid of a few bureaucrats trying to cover their tracks?" Mr. Crawford attempted to regain control of the situation. "These are serious allegations that would require extensive investigation. In the meantime, the transfer to Meridian Institute would still be advisable." "Actually," Marcus replied, "the transfer is no longer an option. I've been accepted into Professor Vasquez's independent research program, which has been approved by the academic board as of this morning." He enjoyed watching their expressions change as they realized their carefully constructed trap had become a prison of their own making. The research program gave him legitimate academic standing that couldn't be dismissed, while the discrimination complaint put them on the defensive. Dr. Ashford made one last attempt to salvage her position. "Admiral, perhaps we can reach some kind of accommodation. A fresh start might benefit everyone involved." Marcus stood up, his military-bearing automatic as he prepared to deliver his final strike. "Dr. Ashford, I've spent my career protecting people who can't protect themselves. That mission doesn't end just because I'm wearing civilian clothes now." As he walked out of the office, Marcus could hear urgent, whispered conversations beginning behind him. The war for his future had entered a new phase, one where he held the initiative, and his enemies were forced to react to his moves. The following weeks brought a cascade of changes to Pinnacle Academy. The discrimination investigation proceeded with the thoroughness of a military operation, led by Admiral Sarah Chen and supported by a coalition of veterans' rights organizations that Marcus hadn't even known existed. Derek's campaign of harassment ended abruptly when several students came forward to testify about the systematic bullying they had witnessed or experienced. His father's position on the academy board couldn't protect him from the weight of documented evidence. Professor Vasquez's research program became a model for how military experience could be integrated into academic achievement rather than treated as a liability. Marcus's insights into alien technology led to breakthroughs that advanced humanity's understanding of the universe in measurable ways. But perhaps most importantly, the culture of intimidation and exclusion that had defined Pinnacle Academy began to crumble as students and faculty found the courage to speak out against injustice. Marcus had won more than his own right to education. He had started a revolution that would benefit countless others who came after him. Standing in the Academy's gardens 6 months later, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from the battlefields of distant stars to the corridors of an Earth school. He had discovered that some of the most important battles weren't fought with weapons but with courage, principle, and the willingness to stand up for others. Sarah joined him by the fountain, her tablet showing acceptance letters from the top universities on 3 different planets. "So what's next for the famous Admiral Chen?" Marcus smiled, feeling something he hadn't experienced since before the war. Genuine hope for the future. "I think I'll stick around and see what other battles need fighting. It turns out Earth has its own conflicts that need resolving." The fountain continued its endless cycle, but Marcus no longer saw it as artificial and meaningless. Like everything else in his new life, it was what he chose to make of it, and he had chosen to make it the foundation for something better than what had come before. Humanity had survived the war against alien invaders, but the real victory would be measured in how well they treated their own heroes when they came home from battle. Marcus had fought for that victory and won, proving once again that humans were capable of rising above their worst impulses to become something worthy of the stars they had claimed as their birthright.